Well, good afternoon and good morning, depending on where you're joining us. My name is Rhett Buttle. Before we hop into the webinar, I just wanted to run through some quick housekeeping items. First, we wanted to let everyone to know that today's business leader briefing is being recorded. Second, we really want to make sure that this is an interactive dialogue, so please direct any questions or comments you have to the organizer in the chat box. If you look over to the right side of your screen, you can enter questions throughout the presentation. We'll be taking them, and then hopefully at the end we'll have a lot of time to hop into discussion towards the end of the presentation, but we really want to make sure that you all have the opportunity to do so, so feel free to pop those in at any time. Quickly wanted to start the conversation by introducing myself and our organization. For those of you who aren't familiar with us, my name is Rhett Buttle. I'm the founder and principal of Public-Private Strategies. Public-Private Strategies, we are a firm that is focused on where the public and private sector meets. We work to bring together allies across the private sector to solve some of society's most pressing issues. Both me and my co-founder, Katie Wannenberg, have worked pretty deeply in the small business and entrepreneurship space. And so while we work very widely across the private sector, a huge part of our heart and interest is in small business and entrepreneurship, and are huge promoters of what small business and entrepreneurship can do for our country. And I think that's today why we are really excited about today's webinar and are so thrilled to partner with the Kauffman Foundation to bring this conversation to bear. Before I introduce our first speaker, what I wanted to do was quickly make this a little bit fun and interactive. Wanted to get a sense of some folks who are going to be on the line. So with that, we're going to go ahead and do a poll question. So you should see up on your screen a poll question pop up. And what we want to do is we want to give everyone a moment to take the poll. So just quickly, give us a sense of who's online with us today. What description best represents you? So policymaker, are you working in the policy arena? Do you make policy? Are you working on legislation, regulation? Small business and entrepreneurship, are you a small business owner yourself? Maybe you work in the small business and entrepreneurship space as a promoter at a small business advocacy organization. We also noticed we had some folks from the philanthropy space sign up today. So are you a potential fellow grant maker like Kauffman and thinking about these strategies? And then of course that all-inclusive other bucket. So again, please just take one quick moment. We'll pause here for a second and let us know which of these categories best describe you. All right, we should be able to quickly share the results. All right, so a really great mix. We have about 30%, 20% folks who are thinking about policy, a nice strong showing in the small business and entrepreneurship space. Those are my peeps. And then about 6% philanthropy, and then that other bucket. We'll have to dig into that. But I think what's great about this is that this suits really, really well for the conversation that we're about to have. So with that, what I'd like to do is I would like to very quickly transition into our conversation and wanted to introduce our guest speaker. So it is my pleasure now to introduce Jason Wiens, who's the Policy Director for Entrepreneurship at the Kauffman Foundation. Jason leads the foundation's strategy to reduce barriers to entrepreneurship by improving public policy. Many of you on the line are probably familiar with him, but he also writes pretty frequently and has been featured in the Wall Street Journal, Roll Call, The Hill, Washington Monthly, and the Venture Beat. Prior to joining the foundation, he comes from a legislative background, which I think probably makes this project near and dear to his heart. But he was legislative director for U.S. Senator Jerry Moran, where he provided a series of counsel and worked on the development and implementation of entrepreneurship-related work. And he spent some time, obviously, at Northwestern, where he did his formal education. So with that, it is my pleasure to turn the line over to Jason. Jason, take it away.
All right. Thank you, Rhett. Thank you, Colin, and to the whole team at Public-Private Strategies. I'm grateful for the opportunity to be part of this conversation today, and to all of you for joining and for your interest in entrepreneurship, and specifically entrepreneurship policy, how we create better conditions for people who are starting businesses to be successful. So at the outset, I wanted to just say a word about the Kauffman Foundation. We are a bipartisan private grant-making foundation headquartered in Kansas City, Missouri, with a $2 billion endowment, and we put that money to use in two areas where our work is focused. Entrepreneurship being one of those areas, and education the other. Next slide, please. So for this audience, with so many people who are a small business owner or work in this space around entrepreneurship, as we saw in the poll, the slide that you have before you now may not be necessary, but nevertheless, I included it because I think it's important when we have conversations like this to kind of just level set around why is entrepreneurship an important topic? Why should lawmakers and others care about this and give it thought and careful attention? And from my perspective, there are many reasons why entrepreneurship matters. You could look at the impact that entrepreneurs have on innovation, or your interest may be in self-sufficiency and self-determination and entrepreneurship's role in that, or community revitalization. Those and so many other things are connected to entrepreneurship, and I think are reasons why entrepreneurship matters. But from a public policy perspective, perhaps one of the most compelling reasons why entrepreneurship, small business matters is because of what you see on this graph here. And that is that nearly all net new jobs that are created in the U.S. economy come from new and young businesses, those that are started by entrepreneurs. And this positive impact that entrepreneurs have on net job creation in our country is in good economic times and bad economic times. Next slide, please. But, and this probably also will not be surprising to many of you, entrepreneurship is in trouble in the United States today. For the past 20 years, the rate of new entrepreneurs has been essentially flat. And when you look at other sources of data, or you look at the data differently, for example, if you look at the number of employer firms, those businesses that have hired workers in their first year, as a percentage of the U.S. population, we are in a decades-long decline in entrepreneurship in America. Next slide, please. Now, the reasons for the stagnant rate of entrepreneurship or the decline in new business creation in our country are complicated. But I think there are at least two significant factors. And the first factor is that entrepreneurs today face many, many barriers in trying to start, build, and grow a successful business. And moreover, access to entrepreneurship is not equal today. Women, people of color, those who live in rural communities face unique barriers to starting a business and make entrepreneurship, which is already difficult and hard, even harder and more challenging than it should be. A second contributing factor is that, and this is for the policymakers on the line, not meant to paint everyone with a broad brush, but in our experience at the foundation, what we find is that many policymakers are not paying attention to entrepreneurship, and that when government does act to support business, support tends to be skewed towards those already established and often larger businesses, and not the new businesses and the entrepreneurs in their communities who are trying to start new things. Next slide, please. Everyone, of course, knows and has read a lot of commentary about the search for Amazon HQ2, but just think for a second about what could have been possible if, rather than putting so many dollars on the table to try and lure one of the largest, most powerful companies in the world to come to their city or state, local government spent just a fraction of that money and invested that instead in supporting entrepreneurs, the people who are already living in their state or in their city, who have an idea and are trying to turn that idea into a business. Next slide, please. So at the Kauffman Foundation, we believe strongly that anyone who has an idea, regardless of who that person is or where that person is from, should be able to take that idea and turn it into a business. But we just talked about some of the challenges that exist for entrepreneurs, the many barriers that have been erected that make that process harder. And so to tackle those challenges and to build greater support for entrepreneurs, the Kauffman Foundation released something in October called America's New Business Plan. America's New Business Plan is a bipartisan policy roadmap to support entrepreneurs with recommendations for federal, state, and local government. Next slide, please. Now, the recommendations that are made in America's New Business Plan are organized around 4 needs that are, I would say, nearly universal that entrepreneurs have. And those 4 needs are opportunity, funding, knowledge, and support. And I want to say a few words about each of those 4. So on opportunity, new and small businesses do not have the same resources that big and established businesses do to navigate regulations. And so there is a need to level the playing field and cut the red tape that is holding entrepreneurs back. When it comes to funding, this is often the top concern that entrepreneurs will mention to you. Entrepreneurs say in public polls that that capital is the most important resource needed for starting a business, but that it's also the most significant barrier to entrepreneurship. And according to additional research, about 83% of entrepreneurs don't access either bank loans or venture capital when launching a business. Women, Black, and Latinx entrepreneurs disproportionately struggle to raise the funds that their businesses need. And so we need to create equal access to the right kind of capital for all entrepreneurs, regardless of where they are in the country. The third need that entrepreneurs have, knowledge. Many entrepreneurs were not taught the skills needed to successfully launch a business during their formal education or training. Instead, entrepreneurs tend to learn as they go. They seek support from other business owners, from organizations that offer coaching. And we believe that government has a role to play in helping entrepreneurs get the skills and know-how that they need in order to be successful. And finally, the fourth need, support. Becoming an entrepreneur is a courageous act. I don't think I will ever be brave enough to be an entrepreneur, but I admire them greatly. But when we talk to entrepreneurs or people across the country, many Americans feel that entrepreneurship is out of reach for them today. Some people are held back by financial obligations like paying off student debt. Others fear the impact on their personal finances, what that would mean to them if they started a business. Additionally, some people have medical conditions that make maintaining affordable and quality health care essential. And so we feel that there is a need for a stronger safety net that enables more Americans to take the risk of being an entrepreneur. Next slide, please. So America's New Business Plan is structured and organized around those 4 needs. We call them the 4 pillars of the plan. And under each pillar, there are a number of recommendations that are made to strengthen entrepreneurship. So for example, in the opportunity pillar, one of the recommendations made in the plan is to create what we call an entrepreneurship impact statement. And this would require the government to assess the impact of any proposed new law or regulation on new businesses before acting. And there's often talk in Washington, I know, about regulatory reform and how can we look back at existing rules and regulations that are on the book and clean out ones that are no longer applicable or duplicative. That's important, but we also want to try and bring the lens of entrepreneurship and new business to the forefront of policy discussions and have this be a consideration that lawmakers make before acting on policy proposals. Another idea in the knowledge pillar is to really integrate entrepreneurship into K through 16 education in our country. And to do that through things like project-based learning or client-based projects and internships, as well as, figuring out more ways in which we can give students opportunities to explore things like design thinking and prototyping so that students are learning the habits and the mindset that they would need if they wanted to pursue entrepreneurship later in life. Next slide, please. So to create this policy agenda, America's New Business Plan, we believe that it was really critical that the plan reflect the diversity of entrepreneurial experiences across America. And so we spent the first part of 2019 doing the things you see on this slide. We looked at a number of different public polls that had been done of entrepreneurs, nationally representative samples to get the entrepreneur perspective and voice to inform the recommendations that were made in the plan. The Kauffman Foundation did informal surveys of entrepreneurs at events that we hosted. Our team spoke to nearly 50 leaders in the entrepreneur community, including successful entrepreneurs like Steve Case. And of course, we consulted the research literature to see what scholars had found and what the data showed about entrepreneurship. And all of those different inputs came together into the content of America's New Business Plan. And so while the Kauffman Foundation has spent time and financial resources to create this plan, we really don't view it as the Kauffman Foundation's agenda. As the slide says, we see this as a plan by and for entrepreneurs. Next slide, please. And so that's why that when we released America's New Business Plan in October, we also launched the Start Us Up Coalition. The Start Us Up Coalition is a diverse group of organizations who are all working to elevate the importance of entrepreneurship and to support entrepreneurs in different ways. And they've joined the coalition to lend their support and to help elevate entrepreneurship as a greater priority in our country and to build support for America's New Business Plan. In the 6 to 8 weeks since we launched, the coalition has now grown to more than 125 organizations, including nonprofits and a few for-profits. Next slide, please. So since launching, we've been actively trying to get the word out about America's New Business Plan and the importance of entrepreneurship. We think that there's an opportunity as we move into 2020. We're in the midst of a presidential election season that we can make entrepreneurship a greater priority among policymakers at all levels of government and really give entrepreneurs, small business owners, the attention that they deserve. And so in addition to a robust media effort, we've also been engaging directly with policymakers and supporting coalition members in their own engagement. So finally, next slide. I wanted to share a few ideas, if any of this sounds of interest to you, about what you can do to join with us and many other organizations who are working on this initiative. And so a few of them are listed here. One simple and easy task, you can do it right now if you have your phone with you, is just to follow Start Us Up, the coalition, at Start Us Up Now on Twitter and Facebook. You can also visit our website, startusupnow.org. If you're an organization, we'd love for you to complete the form where you can join the other 125 and growing organizations that are part of the Start Us Up Coalition. If you're an individual and you're interested in staying up to date on our activities, please sign up for our mailing list and we'll send you regular updates with information about the progress we're making. And you can do that at the website. A more specific and timely thing that you can do, our team has reached out just in the last several days to the moderators of next week's Democratic presidential debate with the objective that we would love to see a question asked of the candidates next week, specifically about entrepreneurship. And so you can help us try and convince the moderators that this is worth their time to ask this of the candidates so that we can learn what candidates think about the issue, whether they have a plan to support new and small business growth in America. And so the moderator Twitter handles are there on your screen. And then finally, to the extent, if you're not a policymaker, talking to your lawmakers about this issue and why support for new and small business is important. And if you are a lawmaker, and you care about this issue, talking to your colleagues, to fellow staff about entrepreneurship and why it's important, And I'd really encourage you to check out the recommendations that are made in America's New Business Plan, and would be happy to discuss with anyone how we might be able to work with you towards implementation of some of those ideas. So with that, I'll stop. Look forward, hopefully, to some questions and discussion on these issues, and I'll turn it back over to Rhett.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Jason. Really appreciate it. That was really helpful context. We already have some questions coming in, so we'll get to those. I also want to remind other folks, if you have questions, feel free to go ahead and put them into the chat box. Now is time, and we will begin to sift through those. One common question we get is whether the slides will be available. I think Jason is probably more than happy to make his slides available, but Jason, correct me if I'm wrong. And before we hop into the meaty questions that we have here, what we wanted to do is we wanted to do one more poll. So just very briefly here, you'll see the next poll question pop up. Which pillar is most important to you in your organization? So Jason talked about the 4 pillars that they have created the plan around, the first being opportunity, the second being funding, the third being knowledge, the fourth being support. We'll just take 1 minute here while you all answer the question. Again, the first being opportunity, the second being funding, the third being knowledge, the last being support. So which pillar is most important to you in the organization that you're representing? So we should have results from the poll here really shortly. Awesome. So that is super interesting to see. You can see here we have about 33% opportunity, close to half on funding, lower level on knowledge, and about 13% on support. I guess, Jason, before we hop in, any quick reactions to just the poll and thoughts from our respondents here?
Yeah, quick reaction to the poll. In almost every conversation that I have with entrepreneurs, funding is the top concern that they have. So I'm not surprised to see that in our Snap poll here, that's the most relevant or important issue here. And one of the things, though, that maybe we've been a little bit more surprised at is that it's a little low in this poll. 13% saying support is the most important to them. We did a roundtable discussion with the chairs of the Senate Entrepreneurship Caucus back in September, with about 24 women entrepreneurs from across the country, and this topic of support and how do we de-risk in some ways entrepreneurship actually emerged in that conversation as I think the most significant issue to those particular founders. And I think that it may have caught some of the folks in the room who worked for the co-chairs, but a bit by surprise.
It's super interesting. Let me stay with this line real quick. We have plenty of questions streaming in, so what I'm going to try to do is sort of bring them together and sort of ask them together so that we can be as efficient as possible. So just sticking with funding, can you talk about whether the foundation is going to be making any support available in the form of grants, and if so, what that might look like or how people might engage at that level, and who might that funding, if it's available, be available for?
Sure. So as a foundation, our grant making goes primarily to, I'd say 90% to 501c3 public charities. We don't support or invest in new businesses and startups, but we try and help entrepreneurs through other means. And one of the most kind of important ways, in addition to our policy efforts and our research that we do at the foundation, is by helping nonprofits that are providing that knowledge and support, the mentoring, the training to entrepreneurs and communities across the country. So those efforts from the foundation will continue. We just actually closed on Friday an RFP where we were looking for policy-related projects to help us build awareness and support for the ideas in America's New Business Plan. But if anyone who's interested and has an idea that they want to pitch to the foundation, we're always open to hearing those. and there's a form on our website, Kauffman.org, where you can submit your ideas.
Awesome. Now just sort of moving to the policymaker line, a few questions that are popping up. One is we have a question from Casey Webb, who's an entrepreneur. Casey says that federal support is really important to small business, but urban centers are continuing to grow, and Casey shares that they live in an urban center. I'm going to omit that. But they're concerned about sort of what's going on at a local level and sort of too much, it sounds like local governance sort of impeding small business growth. Does the plan say anything about local level engagement with policymakers, Jason?
It does. The 15 or 16 recommendations that are made in the plan apply at all levels of government. Maybe let me say that differently. Not every recommendation applies at all levels of government, but every level of government is addressed in the plan. And I think to the questioner's point about, really the significance of some of those local regulations, licensing processes, zoning. Our Vice President of Entrepreneurship at the Kauffman Foundation says, and I love this quote, that entrepreneurs often die a death of 1,000 cuts. And so it's all of these little things that, no one, regulation perhaps is, kills the startup, but it's the accumulation of all of these barriers and how that wears on an entrepreneur who's trying to get started. And so streamlining the process of starting a business is critical, and it's a recommendation we make. And there are significant steps that a city and state can take towards making that process of starting a business a little bit more simple or simpler.
Interesting. So there's we have an integrated question here that kind of integrates some of the questions. Ute, who's participating with us, is asking about, are there sort of the intersection of the funding question and advocacy? And so really interested in sort of what policy changes are touching on, if any, the SBA, and thinking about how, helping small business owners can be focused on sort of creating policy change through affecting SBA programs. Anything on that?
Yes, I would say indirectly. So one of the recommendations that we make in the funding section of America's New Business Plan is for a national commitment to be made to expanding access to capital for all entrepreneurs. And what we envision and call for in the plan is that the president really, make this a priority for the country, because we think that at that level of attention is where we need this issue of greater access to the right kinds of capital for all entrepreneurs to be elevated to. And among the things that one could do if that kind of commitment and focus was brought to the issue of entrepreneurial funding would certainly involve SBA. SBA is a critical component of the entrepreneurial ecosystem through their programs like the 7A loans. But I think there's other things that the federal government has done in the past that we should look at again. So, for example, a lot of people pointed us when we were doing the work to figure out, what should the recommendations be in America's New Business Plan. A lot of people talked favorably of the State Small Business Credit Initiative. This was something that the Treasury Department ran under the Obama administration. It has since closed, but there's been talk about, what if we did something like that again and we learned lessons from the first attempt and we made it better the second time? And how can we get SBA to better support, access to capital for entrepreneurs? I think there's so many things that can be done, and we do try and address some of those in America's New Business.
Yeah, and as someone who worked on SSBCI, I am a huge fan and supporter, and something that I think like entrepreneurs loved, as well as states and governors, and a good integration between the federal and state government. Bringing together some more policy-related questions. There's some questions about how policymakers are receiving the plan in general. I know you spoke a little bit about your briefings. Maybe you could tease that out a little bit. And then there's some questions here around sort of the concern of bipartisanship and just sort of the current nature of Washington. And so I think there's a curiosity about how you all are approaching to make sure that this is either bipartisan or as nonpartisan as possible.
Yes, let me, great things to discuss. I think I'll try and tackle the bipartisan or nonpartisan question first. In my experience, one of the things that makes my job easier, and Rhett, I imagine you find this too, is that you walk into a policymaker's office and you say, hey, I'm here to speak to you about entrepreneurship and small business. No one has slammed the door in my face. People are usually open to that conversation, regardless of whether they're a Republican or a Democrat. And so entrepreneurship and small business, support for small business, I think we're lucky that this is still perhaps one of the few issues that doesn't have a stark partisan divide. And it's important that we keep the issue such, because it increases the chances, I believe, that we can achieve progress and see policies change in ways that help entrepreneurs. In creating America's New Business Plan, we worked with a team that was led by two former directors of the White House Domestic Policy Council, one under President Bush, the other under President Clinton. And so we were intent from the outset in making sure that perspectives on the left and the right informed America's New Business Plan. And this connects, I think, to the other question, which is how has it been received from lawmakers? And the response has been positive, and positive on both sides of the aisle so far. I think most lawmakers probably will gravitate, depending on their viewpoints and existing priorities, to some rather than other recommendations that are made in the plan. But I believe that there's likely to be something in there for most lawmakers that they could get behind. And even if none of the 15 or 16 recommendations that are made in the plan appeal to them, what we've heard is that the structure that we have given around the 4 pillars of opportunity, funding, knowledge, and support, there are many other policies that are important that fall under those areas that would be advantageous to new and small business owners. And I think what we're hearing is that people have found that framework helpful, even if they're not going to push for or advocate for a specific recommendation in the plan, but that the framework and the language in the plan has been helpful to them.
That's super helpful. So we have 3 more sort of key questions in the summary, Jason, and then we will not keep you all afternoon. There's a question about whether you all have looked at the plans that the presidential campaigns have put out. Specifically, there's some mentions of Elizabeth Warren's funding around communities of color. And so just wondering whether that sort of base of knowledge has been tapped into yet from the presidential candidates who put out some form of a small business or entrepreneurship plan.
We are aware of the plans, but because of the restrictions that the IRS places on private foundations like Kauffman, which prohibit us from engaging in political activities and that prohibit us from lobbying, we have to be careful around the content of the recommendations that we make. And so we didn't look at any candidate's plan and try and incorporate in any fashion any of those ideas into America's New Business Plan. At a high level, what we want to accomplish with this is to see policies change in ways that create a better environment for entrepreneurs, to make the entrepreneurship process a bit easier, to reduce barriers to new business creation. And the recommendations that are made in America's New Business Plan, we believe would accomplish those goals, but they're not the only recommendations that would accomplish those goals. Other ideas are valuable and worthwhile, and I think the more policymakers are paying attention to entrepreneurship, to new and small business, that's a win from our perspective. It's less about what is the specific policy that gets enacted.
Helpful. The second is, and this, I imagine this question is coming from a fellow philanthropist, curious as to what you're doing to mobilize other philanthropy funders to get engaged in the effort.
The Kauffman Foundation is a member of a fairly young network of foundations that are working and funding in entrepreneurship, the Entrepreneurship Funders Network. And so we have engaged that network around America's New Business Plan. A number of those foundations contributed ideas and perspective in the early process. And we have at least one other foundation, the Telluride Foundation, which is based in Colorado, that has joined the coalition. So we're eager to talk to other foundations that have an interest in these topics, and would be happy to explore with you what some working relationship might look like around this topic.
Helpful. And then the last question before we let you go, and I'm sorry, I'm doing my best to sort through all the questions and sort of bring the common themes, is there any work that you're doing with unique Bedfellows to sort of move forward this campaign?
No one has asked me that before, so you're stumping me.
We've got someone who's stumped you. We can always come back to them, but I feel like it's a good question and an opportunity for us all to think outside the box.
Yeah, it is a good question. I mean, I'd have to take a look probably at our list of coalition members and with that lens to see if there are any that I would be surprised who have both expressed support for this effort and are working with us towards shared goals. My mind also goes to lawmakers. I think the fact that we have in the last year or so seen in the U.S. House and Senate bipartisan entrepreneurship caucuses be established for the first time is significant. The Senate caucus is led by Amy Klobuchar, someone who's running for the presidential nomination on the Democratic side, and a Republican, Tim Scott. I don't know how often their voting records align, but here's a place where they've come together recognizing the importance of new and small business. And I think the more lawmakers learn about this issue, and particularly when they hear from business owners, the more of that kind of cooperation we're likely to see on the subject.
Awesome. Well, just quickly about next steps for folks, and I'm going to give Jason the opportunity to share some closing thoughts. But while he gathers those, I want to let folks know that we are as an organization incredibly committed to doing whatever we can to help Jason and team move things forward. Please feel free to be in touch with us, communications@public-private strategies. I think most of you on the line today have mine and Colin's email. I think we're happy to be helpful. With Jason's permission, we will think about putting this webinar maybe up on our website so that folks who want to on-demand view it can learn more about the plan as well. And really looking forward to working together over the next few months to sort of push this effort forward. And just a huge thanks to Jason for taking the time. He has been such a huge champion, both not only in his work in the grant-making space, but also he has been himself flying in and out of DC and participating in these meetings and these briefings, which just takes a toll. So with that, Jason, wanted to quickly turn it over to you for last words and closing thoughts that you want to offer to the folks who took the time to join us today.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you to everyone for your engaged questions and the time you spent with us this afternoon to talk about these issues. Maybe my parting thought, I think, will be that no one organization is big enough or capable of achieving the kind of change that I think we need to see in this country around greater support for entrepreneurs. And if we want to live in a country and in communities where more people, everyday Americans who have an idea, are able to take that idea and turn it into a business, we need to engage collectively with our local, state, and federal officials to elevate this issue and to educate them about why entrepreneurship matters and what can be done. And so thank you to those of you who are doing that, to the lawmakers and staff who are paying attention to this issue. Thank you. And I look forward, hopefully, to working with many of you on these issues moving forward.
Wonderful. With that, thanks to everyone for joining today. This now concludes our webinar. Have an excellent afternoon, everyone.